let me just put it like this. Um, people last year were totally right about Nick Sirianni, and I pointed it out like this, right? Like Nick Sirianni really isn't my favorite coach. He really doesn't have the type of attitude that I like. Um, he's he's just not mature in any way, shape, or form, and you could see it last year when he was like mugging for the camera all the time, and people pointed it out. A lot of people like hate Nick Sirianni. Um, I can I can see why. Like even I pointed it out then. Um, he just doesn't have the maturity to be a head coach at this point. Like when you're a head coach and you're an established head coach and you've gone to the Super Bowl, like when your team starts losing and when like they seem to like lack complete and total direction, like it just seems like he's not the kind of guy that it can really motivate them to do really well. I mean, like last year the team did really well, won 14 games, went to the Super Bowl, obviously like lost in the Super Bowl. That dude got memed to death, which I kind of feel bad about. Like if he wasn't like so unlikable to people, they wouldn't be like memeing his like crying during the national anthem. I knew that was going to happen the moment I saw it. Um, but I just don't think that he has the maturity at all to be like an NFL, like a real NFL head coach. Like I think a lot of players like him. I think that a lot of players like being around him, but like I don't really think he motivates them very well. I don't think that he motivates his coordinators either. We've been seeing the same plays all season from Brian Johnson, and Nick Sirianni hasn't really done anything about it, which, what would he do? Nick Sirianni isn't a play caller either. Anybody remember the first 8 or 9 weeks of 2021 where they were running Miles Sanders 8 times a game? And again, like, I mean, it speaks to ownership. A lot of people have had these theories that Jeffrey Lurie, the owner of the team, he wants the Eagles, in his perfect world, would pass the ball on every single play. And then you look at games like this against the Giants where the Eagles had chances to score points. It's just they didn't because they didn't even get into long situations. They just refused to give the ball to Gainwell, who Gainwell was having a really good game. Gainwell was killing it. But then they just got away from it for whatever. I don't know what reason they got away from it. They just did. Jalen Hurts can't see the middle of the field, but Mariota can for some reason. And there's no adjusting. The defense, it's bad. The defense is horrendous. The Giants really didn't do anything spectacular against the Eagles. They didn't. They ran a lot of corner routes, which the Eagles cannot cover corner routes. And it speaks to the talent of the defensive backfield. Howie Roseman still continues to not want to put some real stock into the corners and the safeties and the linebackers. Really, like, here's what Howie Roseman does in the first round. He will either draft a quarterback in the first round, he will draft a wide receiver, he will draft a defensive end or a defensive tackle, or he will draft a guard or an offensive tackle. That is how Howie Roseman drafts, and is very, very last decade of drafting. These days, right, like, I would love to get a linebacker. Anybody want to see how the Cowboys are built? So the Cowboys, I mean, Micah Parsons helps with the run defense. But one of the reasons why the Cowboys are so great against the pass is because their linebackers are essentially safeties who can cover very well. I don't know if anybody has noticed that, but I've noticed that many times. They are safeties that can tackle very well, who can cover very well, and they put them at linebacker. That's what they do. And I think that it's genius. It's absolutely genius. And on top of Dan Quinn just being a genius defensive coordinator, it's just amazing how lacking the Eagles have been in that category. The Eagles will never draft a cornerback early. They will always save their linebackers, their cornerbacks, their safeties for low round picks, and you know, we are not benefiting from it at all. I mean, last year the Eagles had 70 sacks. This year they have like 42. The pass rush can't get home. Sometimes I hate watching Eagles games because our pass rushers are slower than the other team. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that two members of our defensive line are pushing 35. I don't know. And we had this issue at defensive coordinator. We had a defensive coordinator by like week 10 or 11. We realized that he was garbage and then switched him with Matt Patricia, but they still run the same plays. They still run the same system. So like, what's the difference? This team just needs a huge overhaul. I'm not recommending that the Eagles fire Nick Sirianni because here's the thing. If the Eagles fired Nick Sirianni, here's what would happen. No one would ever want to coach at the Philadelphia Eagles ever again. Like the Philadelphia Eagles are already an organization that people don't want to coach in because the fans are just a nightmare for coaching staffs. They're like the whole thing about running them out of town, like that's totally true. So like you don't want to make that situation even worse. Because like the last like 3 out of 4 coaches the Eagles have just been completely undesirable by anybody else in the NFL. Basically scraps, and somehow they're able to like take their team to the Super Bowl. Like nobody wanted Andy Reid, nobody wanted Doug Peterson, and nobody wanted Nick Sirianni. We were the only ones that wanted him, those individuals. So like that's what happens, and the city just sours on these coaches really fast. So like honestly, I wouldn't fire Nick Sirianni unless he had a bad season. Like he had like under a 6-win season or worse. Not because he's a good coach, but because it'd just be a PR nightmare. It would be a PR nightmare. We would never be able to sign a head coach that we like. Nobody would come here unless they were completely desperate, because a lot of these guys, they don't want to ruin their reputation by going to a franchise that wasn't playing well at the time. So I'm not like advocating for firing Sirianni, but also I don't think he's the guy, because I don't think that he holds the players accountable. I don't think he holds the coaches accountable. He just yells all the time. He's just blah, 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 like yelling all the time. I mean, one time he got in a yelling match with Devontae Smith during the last Giants game. You just don't do that with players. Like a player has an opinion. Like don't shout him down. And if so facto, what you did not work. So I don't know. Again, I don't think that Nick Sirianni is the coach for the future. I think that within the next 2 years, he will be fired. Just because I don't know really what he does well at this point. A lot of people who said that he was just he just had a lot of talent on the team and that's why he was good. A lot of these guys sound like geniuses at this point.